The question, simple and pure, sliced through the oppressive silence of the Whitmore mansion's
Excuse
grand
me,
dining
miss.
room. Would you like to have dinner with us? It came not from one of the glittering socialites or powerful politicians assembled, but from the
Excuse
memory
me,
of a
miss.
blind little black girl, her voice a melody against the discordant hum of his family's prejudice. James Whitmore, at 34, the celebrated CEO of the nation's largest educational technology company, sat trapped at the head of the long mahogany table, a king in a gilded cage. Christmas Eve, a night meant for warmth and cheer, felt like a tribunal. "We hope you understand, James," his mother, Victoria Whitmore, began, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble mantelpiece behind her. She discreetly, yet pointedly, gestured towards the glowing screen of his cell phone resting on the polished wood. "People like her just don't fit in at our family events." The image on the phone was of Rachel, her smile as radiant as a sunrise, standing next to her 6-year-old daughter, Isabella, whose dark sunglasses couldn't hide the joy that seemed to emanate from her very being. "It's Christmas, dear Victoria," continued, her tone a masterclass in condescension. "Think of our reputation. The optics are simply dreadful." James remained silent, a statue carved from frustration. Around him, the tableau of his family played out its familiar, ugly script. His two brothers, Mark and Thomas, exchanged knowing, smug glances, their wives mirroring their husband's silent judgment. His sister-in-law Margaret, a woman whose ambition was matched only by her venom, leaned towards her husband and whispered, her voice a sibilant hiss, "These people are always trying to infiltrate places where they don't belong." It's a classic case of social climbing. His father, Senator Richard Whitmore, a man who wore his power like a tailored suit, adjusted his designer glasses, the gold frames glinting in the chandelier's light. "Besides," he added, his voice resonating with the practiced authority of the Senate floor, "a child with disabilities would surely make everyone uncomfortable. You know how these families are, always wanting to draw attention to their limitations, seeking handouts." It's a performance. A hot white rage coiled in James's gut. He clenched his fist around his phone, the smooth metal cool against his sweaty palm. The faces of Rachel and Isabella swam before his eyes. He had met them 3 months ago, a chance encounter that had become the single point of light in his increasingly shadowed world. His company, Whitmore Educational Technologies, had launched a new digital inclusion program, a venture his father had lauded as excellent PR and a shrewd business move. The program aimed to bring cutting-edge learning tools to underfunded public schools. It was during a visit to Roosevelt Elementary, a crumbling brick building in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn, that he had seen Rachel. She was a teacher, but that title felt woefully inadequate. She was a warrior, a tireless advocate for children society had already written off. She fought for every resource, celebrated every small victory, and instilled in her students a sense of worth that defied their bleak surroundings. And then there was Isabella, blind since birth. The little girl navigated the world with a confidence and a radiant joy that was a stark, brutal contrast to the brittle falseness of James's own life. She saw more with her heart than his family could ever see with their perfectly corrected vision. She found beauty in the texture of a leaf, the warmth of a sunbeam, the sound of a kind voice. She was a universe of light and laughter contained in a small body. "It's decided then," Victoria declared, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. She poured herself another glass of vintage champagne, the bubbles fizzing like her own effervescent cruelty. "Dinner will be just for the family, as it always should have been." That was it. The snap of a finely tuned wire. Without a word, James pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. He stood, grabbed his cashmere coat from the nearby stand, and walked towards the massive oak door of the mansion. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel their collective shock, their indignation. As he stepped into the cold hallway, he heard Margaret's parting shot, her voice dripping with scorn. "Thank God you've come to your senses. Imagine the embarrassment if someone from the press saw you with them 20 minutes later." The biting December wind was a welcome slap in the face. James sat alone on a park bench in the city center, the festive lights of the square blurring into a kaleidoscope of meaningless color. Families bustled past, their arms laden with brightly wrapped gifts, their faces alight with genuine smiles. His phone, which he had placed on the bench beside him, vibrated incessantly. It was the family group chat, a digital cesspool of their shared toxicity. "Mark, what a childish tantrum. He needs to grow up. Margaret, he's always been too sensitive. It's that artsy side he gets from, well, nowhere in this family." Father, Victoria, perhaps it's time we re-evaluate his access to the trust. A little financial discipline might be what he needs to mature. They thought they knew him. They thought they controlled him. They saw him as the dutiful son, the brilliant CEO who expanded the family's legacy. They had no idea who he had become in the last 3 months. What his family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly conceive, was that James had been recording their conversations, not just tonight's. For the past 3 months, ever since the casual racist joke his father had told at a foundation dinner had turned his stomach, James had been meticulously documenting everything. Every racist slur disguised as a joke, every elitist pronouncement, every venomous whisper, every display of calculated prejudice he had witnessed at family gatherings, board meetings, and social events. He had audio files, screenshots, and detailed notes. He had become a spy in his own home, an archivist of their hate. "Excuse me, sir." The voice, small and sweet as a Christmas carol, pulled him from his dark thoughts. He looked down, and there she was, Isabella, her small hand held securely in Rachel's. Her dark sunglasses reflected the twinkling Christmas lights, making it seem as if she held a galaxy in her eyes. "Would you like to have dinner with us?" she asked again, the same question that had echoed in his mind moments before. "Mom made a turkey that smells really, really good." Something inside James, a wall he had spent a lifetime building, finally broke. It shattered into a million pieces, and through the cracks, a raw, unfamiliar emotion flooded in. Here was his family, his multi-millionaire, powerful, reputable family, rejecting him, threatening him, for choosing to associate with people they deemed unsuitable. And here was a blind little girl, a child who barely knew him, offering him the simple, profound gift of a place at her table. She was offering him the little she had, with no agenda, no conditions, no thought of what she might gain. She was offering him kindness. He stood up, his tall frame unfolding from the bench. He looked at Rachel, whose expression was a mixture of concern and gentle hope. He then looked down at Isabella and offered her a genuine smile, perhaps the first, one that had reached his eyes in years. "It would be an honor," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out and took Isabella's small, offered hand. What neither Rachel nor Isabella could have imagined was that this simple, heartfelt invitation was the catalyst. It was the spark that would ignite a firestorm, a chain of events that would not only transform James's life forever, but would redraw the entire power map of the city's most prejudiced and corrupt elite. The Whitmores believed they were untouchable, secure in their fortress of wealth and influence. They were about to learn that underestimating the power of a child's kindness, and the resolve of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for, would be the biggest, and last, mistake they would ever make. The contrast between the Whitmore mansion and Rachel's apartment in a quiet, tree-lined street in suburban Brooklyn was a lesson in what constituted a home. The mansion was a museum of wealth, cold and impersonal, filled with priceless objects but devoid of warmth. Rachel's apartment was a sanctuary of love. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, adorned with Isabella's drawings, intricate patterns and shapes created with textured paper and glue, her own unique art form adapted to her blindness. The furniture was simple, a little worn, but comfortable and inviting. The air smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and something else James couldn't quite identify. "Peace. Mummy always makes the best food when we have special guests," Isabella announced proudly. She acted as his tour guide, her hand still in his, leading him through the small living room with the unerring confidence of someone who knew every inch of her world by heart. She pointed out her favorite reading corner, a pile of Braille books stacked neatly by a comfy armchair, and the art gallery on the refrigerator door. "You're special, aren't you, Mr. James?" A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard. In the 3 hours since he had walked out of his family's mansion, this 6-year-old child had shown him more genuine affection and acceptance than his entire family had managed in his 34 years of existence. It was a staggering, heartbreaking realization. Meanwhile, his phone, which he had foolishly forgotten to silence, continued its relentless campaign of harassment from the family group chat. The messages were a toxic cocktail of entitlement, cruelty, and emotional blackmail. "Victoria, we hope you've come to your senses, James. People like us don't mix with that kind of people. It's a matter of the natural order of things. Margaret, James, dear, you can play at being charitable, but don't bring that woman and her troubled daughter to our events. Imagine if someone from high society saw them. Our reputation would be ruined. Think of the family." But it was his father's message, a long rambling paragraph of paternal advice, that truly laid bare the rotten core of the Whitmore family philosophy. Senator Whitmore, son, I know you think you're being noble, but you need to be realistic. These people always have ulterior motives. They see our wealth, our position, and they invent stories. They create situations to take advantage of us. It's a classic grift. It's best to keep your distance before they try to sue us for some imagined slight, or worse. You are a target, James. You must protect yourself, and by extension, the family. He watched Rachel as she moved around her small kitchen. She served the simple, home-cooked meal with an unconscious elegance that put Victoria's performative grace at gala dinners to shame. The difference was stark and profound. Rachel's actions were born of love and a genuine desire to share. His mother's were a performance, a carefully choreographed dance of social obligation. Isabella sat next to him at the small dining table, chattering happily about her day at school. Her words were a tapestry of vivid images, painting pictures in his mind more vibrant and alive than any of the static, lifeless paintings that adorned the walls of the museums frequented by his family's elite circle. She described the feel of the new Braille globe in her classroom, the sound of her best friend's laughter, the smell of the rain on the pavement during recess. You know, Rachel said softly, her perceptive eyes noticing the tension etched on his face. Isabella told me you work with schools. It must be very rewarding, helping children get an education. James almost laughed, a bitter hollow sound. The irony was a physical ache in his chest. His company, Whitmore Educational Technologies, did indeed work on digital inclusion. But the initial motivation, he was ashamed to admit, had been purely financial. It was about securing lucrative government contracts, a venture that his father had cynically rebranded as social responsibility. It was only after meeting teachers like Rachel, after seeing firsthand the desperate need and the incredible resilience of the students, that he had begun to understand the true, transformative potential of his work. It was a potential his family saw only in terms of profit margins and public relations. Actually, he confessed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, I think I learn more from the children than they do from me. Isabella paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She turned her face towards him, her head tilted in that unnervingly perceptive way of hers. You look sad, Mr. James, she said, her voice soft with concern. Didn't your family come to dinner, too? The innocent question struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was a well-aimed arrow that pierced through the armor of corporate cool he had spent years perfecting. He looked at this little girl, this child who had known him for a mere fraction of his life, yet could sense his emotional turmoil from the subtle inflections in his voice. His own family, the people who had lived with him for more than 3 decades, had never shown an ounce of such sensitivity. They saw his moods as inconveniences, his emotions as weaknesses to be managed or suppressed. At that precise moment, his phone rang, the shrill, custom ringtone he had assigned to his mother cutting through the quiet warmth of the apartment. It was Victoria, of course. He knew he shouldn't, but he answered it. James, where in God's name are you? Her voice was a shard of ice. We have Senator Morrison here, asking for you. You are embarrassing us. You are embarrassing me. I'm having dinner with friends, Mother, he replied, his voice a mask of calm. What friends? She scoffed. We don't have friends in neighborhoods like wherever it is you've run off to. Come home immediately. No. The single word hung in the air. Declaration of war. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, a vacuum of shocked disbelief. Victoria Whitmore was not accustomed to hearing the word no, especially not from her son, the one she considered her greatest creation, her most valuable asset. James, she said, her voice now dangerously low, stripped of all pretense of maternal concern. It was the voice she used to crush business rivals, to intimidate subordinates. You are forgetting who finances your company. The family trust fund represents 60% of your initial capital. It would be a terrible shame if that support were to be re-evaluated. Across the table, Rachel and Isabella watched him, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. They couldn't hear the words, but they could clearly sense the shift in the atmosphere, the invisible battle being waged over the phone line. I understand perfectly, Mother, James said, his voice maintaining the artificial calm he had honed in years of brutal corporate negotiations. Thank you for clarifying your position. He hung up the phone and with a decisive tap of his finger, powered it off. The silence that followed was a relief, a blessed release from the toxic tether to his family. Rachel approached the table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She placed it in front of him, her touch gentle on his shoulder. Family can be complicated, she said softly, her voice a balm on his frayed nerves. She didn't press, didn't ask any intrusive questions. She simply offered him a moment of quiet solidarity. What Rachel didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that, as he sipped the simple, lovingly prepared tea, James was not just calming his nerves, he was making a decision. He was mentally reviewing the arsenal of evidence he had been secretly compiling for the past 3 months. The recordings of racist, elitist dinner conversations, the screenshots of prejudiced, hateful messages in the family group chat, the financial documents he had begun to suspect, and would soon confirm, pointed to something far more sinister than just social bigotry. He had a strong suspicion that the Whitmore Charitable Foundation, his mother's pet project and the family's primary vehicle for tax evasion and social climbing, was a complete fraud. His company, he knew, was not as dependent on family money as Victoria believed. Over the past 2 years, anticipating a moment just like this, a moment of emotional and financial blackmail, he had been secretly and strategically diversifying his investors. He had courted venture capitalists who were impressed by his vision and his company's performance, not his last name. He had built a firewall around his creation, a firewall his family was about to test. What his family didn't suspect, in their arrogant self-assurance, was that he had meticulously documented every threat, every discriminatory comment, every attempt at financial manipulation. They had unwittingly provided him with the very weapons he would need to dismantle their empire of hypocrisy. After dinner, as he was preparing to leave, Isabella approached him. Her small hands held a folded piece of paper. "I drew you a picture," she said, handing him the sheet. He unfolded it carefully. It was one of her textured creations. He ran his fingers over the raised lines and shapes. He could feel the curve of a smile, the outline of a face. "It's you," she explained, smiling for real, not that sad smile you came in with. He held the piece of paper as if it were the most precious object in the world. In that moment it was the most honest, the most accurate representation anyone had ever made of him. Not the ruthless CEO, not the troubled heir, not the dutiful son, just a man who deserved to smile for real. As he said goodbye to Rachel and Isabella that night, stepping out into the cold Christmas air, James Whitmore was a changed man. His back was against the wall, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. His family had shown him their true colors, their ugliest, most hateful selves, and he had in his possession enough evidence to expose decades of hypocrisy, prejudice, and corruption disguised as family tradition and philanthropy. Each new humiliation, each threat, each venomous word had not broken him, as they had intended. Instead, it had forged something new inside him, something hard and sharp and unyielding, a silent, cold resolve, fueled by the very injustice they sought to impose upon him and upon the world. What the privileged, powerful Whitmores didn't know was that every act of contempt, every word of scorn, was another nail in the coffin of their own making. And the man they had tried to control, the son they had so spectacularly underestimated, had ceased to be their victim the moment a blind little girl had shown him how to truly see the truth. The war had been declared, and James Whitmore was ready to fight. 3 days after that fateful Christmas Eve dinner, James received the call that would set the wheels of his revolution in motion. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional, but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. "James, I need you to come to my office immediately, and bring everything, all those recordings, all those files you mentioned, bring it all." The voice belonged to David Chen, James's lawyer and his only true friend since their days at Harvard. David was not just any lawyer. He was a warrior in a bespoke suit, the son of Korean immigrants who had built a culinary empire from a single food truck. David had faced the same insidious, elitist prejudice that now threatened to consume James's life. The difference was that David had weaponized every humiliation, every slur, every closed door. He had channeled his righteous anger into a brilliant legal mind, becoming the most feared and respected civil rights lawyer on the East Coast. He didn't just win cases. He dismantled systems of oppression. David's office, a sleek, minimalist space in a downtown skyscraper, was a world away from the opulent, suffocating grandeur of the Whitmore corporate headquarters. It was a war room, and when James arrived, the battle plans were already being laid out. "You won't believe what I've found," David said, his voice grim. He spread a series of documents across the vast expanse of his glass desk. "For the past 6 months, ever since you first mentioned your family's particular brand of social commentary, I've been doing some quiet digging of my own. I've been investigating the Whitmore Charitable Foundation." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto James's. They're not just hypocritical racists, James, they're criminals. On a massive scale. The evidence was devastating. A meticulously documented account of systemic corruption. Financial records, obtained through a series of legal and some not-so-legal channels, showed how the family foundation had systematically diverted millions of dollars in funds intended for public schools. The very schools that children like Isabella attended. There were fraudulent contracts awarded to shell companies owned by Whitmore family cronies, systemic and audacious tax evasion schemes, and, most shocking of all, a complex network of corruption that involved local politicians and real estate developers. The foundation's charitable work in low-income neighborhoods was a front for a gentrification scheme designed to push out Black and Latino families to make way for luxury developments. Your family doesn't just despise people like Rachel and Isabella, David continued, his voice a low growl. He pointed to a stack of legally intercepted emails, the product of a whistleblower within the city planning department. They actively work to destroy their communities, to dismantle their lives, all for a profit. The white-hot rage that had been simmering in James's gut for months now solidified into something cold and hard. It was not the blind, impotent fury his family hoped to provoke in him. It was the controlled, focused fury of a man who finally understood the true, monstrous scale of the battle he had to fight. For 3 months, he had been collecting evidence of his family's personal prejudices, their social bigotry. Now, he was discovering that he was dealing with a sophisticated criminal enterprise, a machine of oppression disguised as charity. There's more, David said, turning his laptop towards James. He clicked open a file, and a video began to play. It was security footage from the Foundation's last gala, the one where his father had made the joke that had started it all. Remember that gala? The one where you recorded your family's charming dinner conversation about keeping certain people out of our events. David paused the video, zooming in on a table in the background. Guess who was sitting at that table, laughing along? District Attorney Richardson, the same DA who has systematically buried every housing discrimination case filed against your family's real estate partners for the past 5 years. The puzzle pieces, scattered and seemingly random for so long, now slammed into place with sickening clarity. His family wasn't just a collection of prejudiced individuals. They were the architects and gatekeepers of a corrupt system that perpetuated racial and economic inequality at an institutional level. They weren't just a part of the problem. They were the problem. And now, in their arrogance, they had made the fatal mistake of threatening him, of pushing him to the edge, at the very moment he had gained access to the information that could destroy them completely. Meanwhile, the Whitmores, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break over their heads, continued to spectacularly underestimate him. Victoria, true to her word, had sent him a formal, written ultimatum via her personal lawyer. It demanded that he publicly sever all ties with these unsuitable people or face the immediate loss of not only his access to the family trust fund but also the lucrative government contracts his company held. Contracts he now realized were secured through his father's corrupt network of political influence. Margaret, never one to be outdone in cruelty, had gone even further. She had created a new WhatsApp group, brazenly titled Operation Bring James Back to His Senses. In this private forum, the family openly and gleefully discussed strategies for making James understand his place in the natural social hierarchy. The messages, which James had been secretly monitoring for weeks, were a toxic, damning combination of explicit racism, classist snobbery, and detailed plans for financial and social sabotage. Margaret, maybe we should invite that teacher to one of our events, a proper one. It would be educational for her to see how truly civilized people behave. The contrast would be illuminating. Victoria, excellent idea, darling. The contrast would be obvious. James would finally realize how ridiculous his little romantic fantasy is. He would see that she simply doesn't belong. Father, a more direct approach is needed. I'll have a word with the Department of Education. Perhaps this teacher's performance record needs a closer look. A little professional pressure can work wonders. What they didn't know was that James Buzzell, with the help of a cybersecurity expert he had on his company's payroll, had not only hacked into the group but was also creating a forensically sound time-stamped archive of every hateful word, every discriminatory strategy, every illegal plan for sabotage. His educational technology company had given him access to resources and expertise that no member of his sheltered, technologically inept family could ever suspect he possessed. David Chen let out a short, sharp laugh as he reviewed the most recent messages on James's phone. They're literally documenting their own crimes, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. They're sending each other written confessions. It's like they've never heard of digital evidence. The arrogance. It's breathtaking. How much time do you need? James asked, his voice now devoid of any emotion except a cold, hard determination. David recognized the look in his eyes immediately. It was the look of a man who had crossed a point of no return. To prepare everything, David leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing, connecting dots, formulating strategies for a complete public exposure, reputational annihilation, and criminal prosecution. 2 weeks. But James, he paused, his expression turning serious. He watched his friend closely. Are you sure? I mean, really sure? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Your family will be publicly and permanently destroyed. Your name will be forever linked to this scandal. James's mind flashed to an image of Isabella, her small fingers tracing the raised lines of one of her textured drawings, creating a world of beauty out of the darkness. He thought of Rachel, working 2 jobs, fighting exhaustion and despair, to give her daughter a life of dignity and hope. He thought of the thousands of children in underfunded public schools, children who were being systematically sabotaged by the very foundation that claimed to be their champion. They've had decades to choose to be better people. David, James replied, his voice quiet but firm. They chose this path. Now, it's their turn to face the consequences of their choices. A slow, predatory smile spread across David Chen's face. It was the look he had seen in his own mirror years ago, the day he decided to dedicate his career to destroying the very systems of oppression and privilege that had tried to crush him. Then let's get to work, he said. But first, I need you to do something very specific, something that will require the performance of your life. He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with strategic brilliance. At the next family dinner, I want you to surrender. Tell them they were right. Tell them you've seen the error of your ways. And then, I want you to agree to participate in the Foundation's annual charity gala. It's in 10 days. Tell them you're ready to come back into the fold, to be the son they always wanted, and tell them you want to bring Rachel as your date, as a final, public farewell. James raised an eyebrow, a flicker of concern crossing his face. You want me to expose Rachel to my family's venom? To put her in that snake pit? No, David said, his smile widening. I want your family to expose themselves to the entire world, because that gala, their biggest, most self-congratulatory night of the year, will be broadcast live on all the Foundation's social media channels. It will be their grandest stage, and it will be the perfect platform for our final reveal. We're not just going to defeat them, James. We're going to let them orchestrate their own execution. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel had never looked more opulent, nor felt more charged with a sense of impending drama. The Whitmore Charitable Foundation's annual gala, the glittering jewel in the city's social calendar, had never received so much media attention. 300 guests, a carefully curated collection of the city's social, political, and business elite, gathered under the shimmering crystal chandeliers, all eager to participate in what Victoria Whitmore had promised. In a flurry of press releases, would be a historic event to reaffirm our most cherished traditional family values. James arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, a model of calm and contrition. He was accompanied by Rachel, who wore a simple but exquisitely elegant navy blue dress that highlighted her natural grace, and, holding both their hands, was Isabella, radiant in a light pink dress, her face alight with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. She navigated the crowded, noisy room with the natural confidence of a child who felt completely and utterly loved and protected. The whispers started immediately, a ripple of shock and disapproval spreading through the room like a virus. I can't believe he actually brought them, Margaret hissed to a group of horrified socialites near the main entrance, her voice a stage whisper designed to be overheard. Victoria must be absolutely furious. Imagine the humiliation. It's a deliberate provocation. What Margaret and the rest of her clueless clan didn't know was that every word, every whisper, every venomous aside, was being picked up by a series of high-fidelity microphones, strategically placed throughout the room by David Chun's team. David had coordinated a documentation operation that would make the Watergate journalists look like amateurs. Every camera in the room, every live-streaming feed, was now under his control. Victoria Whitmore, the queen of this gilded cage, glided towards the trio, her face a mask of forced cordiality, a smile stretched so tight it looked painful. It couldn't, however, completely hide the venom in her eyes. James, dear, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a surprise to see you here. With your friends, Mother, James said, his tone one of impeccable, almost exaggerated courtesy. I'd like you to meet Rachel Torres. She's a teacher at Roosevelt Elementary School, and this is her remarkable daughter, Isabella. He paused, letting the introduction hang in the air. Rachel, this is my mother, Victoria Whitmore, the president of the foundation. Victoria extended a reluctant, manicured hand, her fingers barely brushing Rachel's, as if she were touching something contaminated. Delighted, she lied, the word sounding like a curse. I do hope you feel comfortable at our little event. Isabella, with the brutal, unfiltered honesty of a child, tilted her head towards the sound of the strained voice. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her own voice clear and pure, your voice sounds sad. Are you sick? The silence that followed was deafening, a sudden, shocking vacuum in the cacophony of the ballroom. A few nearby guests gasped. Rachel gently squeezed her daughter's hand, a silent signal of support. Victoria, for the first time in her meticulously controlled life, was rendered completely speechless. Her face, a canvas of expensive cosmetics, went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: shock, rage, and finally, utter mortification. Senator Richard Whitmore, ever the politician, quickly stepped forward to control the damage. Well, look who decided to show up, he boomed, his voice the well-trained instrument of a man used to commanding attention. He clapped a heavy hand on James's shoulder. James, I hope you've come to announce your return to reason. Your mother and I were so worried. Actually, Father, James replied, his voice carrying a new, quiet authority that made some of the nearby guests turn and take notice. I have come to make a very important announcement about the future of the foundation. He smiled, a cool, enigmatic smile. But first, how about we show our guests the magnificent art exhibition you and Mother have prepared? What followed was a masterclass in systematic hypocrisy and cruelty, all disguised as social etiquette. Margaret, having recovered her composure, took it upon herself to lead their small group on a tour of the art section, a collection of expensive, soulless paintings that represented, in her words, the glorious history of Western civilization. Her commentary on each work was a thinly veiled lecture, peppered with subtle but poisonous references to people who simply cannot appreciate high culture, and the importance of maintaining certain aesthetic standards. This Monet, Margaret announced, positioning herself so that Rachel and Isabella were clearly excluded from the small circle of admirers she had gathered, was acquired directly from a private French collection. Of course, it takes a certain educational refinement to truly appreciate the technique, the genius of the brushwork. Rachel, to her eternal credit, remained a model of dignity and grace. She held Isabella's hand, listening patiently, and then responded with a series of intelligent, insightful questions about the painting techniques and the historical context of the Impressionist movement, questions that left Margaret visibly irritated and struggling to answer. But it was when they reached the grand piano, a magnificent Steinway, strategically positioned in the center of the room, that the family's planned cruelty reached its crescendo. Isabella, dear, Victoria said, her voice once again dripping with that false, saccharine sweetness that fooled only those who didn't know her. I've heard that special children like you sometimes have remarkable compensatory skills. A gift for music, perhaps. How about you play something for us, for all our guests? The intention was clear, and it was monstrous. The piano was in the center of the room, a spotlight waiting to happen. They hoped for an embarrassing spectacle, a fumbling, awkward performance that would confirm their prejudices and humiliate both the child and her mother. James felt the familiar surge of volcanic rage, but he forced it down, his face a mask of .com. This was it, the moment David Chen had predicted, the moment they would overplay their hand. If Isabella would like to play, he said softly, his voice a quiet counterpoint to his mother's shrillness, it would be an honor for all of us to listen. Isabella, seemingly unfazed by the sudden attention, let go of Rachel's hand and walked towards the piano with the quiet confidence of a seasoned performer. She climbed onto the bench, her small fingers reaching out to touch the cool ivory keys, finding their place by feel. A hush fell over the ballroom, and then, something magical, something transcendent, happened. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune flowed from the piano, each note a drop of liquid moonlight. The music filled the vast room with a purity and an emotional depth that silenced every whisper, every clinking glass. Isabella wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling a story. She was painting a picture with sound. Her small hands, which had never seen the light of day, extracted nuances and colors from the instrument that few professional pianists could ever hope to achieve. The music spoke of longing, of beauty, of a world seen not with the eyes, but with the heart. The silence that followed the final, fading note was one of profound, unadulterated awe and shock. Isabella, the troubled child, the object of their pity and their scorn, had transformed a moment of planned humiliation into a display of genuine, breathtaking talent that left the entire elite of the city speechless. It was at that exact moment, as the room was suspended in a state of collective astonishment, that James walked onto the stage, took the microphone, and began the reckoning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, "I would like to thank you all for attending our annual gala. As you know, our foundation is dedicated to supporting the education and development of underprivileged children." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, finally landing on his family, who were still frozen in a state of shock. "Tonight, I would like to share with you the true impact of our work." On cue, the massive screens scattered around the ballroom, which until that moment had been displaying the Foundation's self-congratulatory logo, flickered and changed. In their place, high-resolution images of financial documents appeared, bank statements, fraudulent contracts, intercepted emails between corrupt politicians and members of the Whitmore family. "Over the past 5 years," James continued, his voice as sharp and cold as a surgeon's scalpel, "our beloved foundation has embezzled more than $8 million. $8 million that should have gone to children like Isabella." Victoria tried to interrupt, to scream, but her voice was drowned out by the sound system, which James now completely controlled. The screens began to display screenshots of the messages from the operation, bring James back to his senses group chat. It would be educational for her to see how truly civilized people behave. James read, his voice dripping with irony, as Margaret's words appeared in giant letters on the main screen. "Those were the words of my sister-in-law, Margaret Whitmore," referring to Rachel Torres, a dedicated teacher who works 2 jobs to give her daughter a life of dignity. A murmur of shock and outrage rippled through the crowd. The journalists in attendance, who had been invited under the pretense of covering a society event, began frantically taking photos, their cameras flashing like lightning in a gathering storm. The Foundation's live broadcast, which was supposed to be a celebration of their generosity, was now a real-time documentation of their destruction. Senator Richard Whitmore, his face purple with rage, tried to approach the stage, but 2 large security guards, men not on the family's payroll but hired by David Chen, discreetly and firmly blocked his path. "And here," James said, as audio recordings began to fill the room, "we have my mother, Victoria Whitmore, explaining how people like Rachel and Isabella just don't fit in at our family events." The unmistakable, cultured voice of his mother echoed through the hall, followed by his father's voice, recorded at a family dinner, discussing strategies for encouraging Black and Latino families to move out of neighborhoods undergoing redevelopment. Every word was laden with prejudice, contempt, and the casual cruelty of the entitled dot. Victoria had gone completely, deathly pale. Margaret, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, made a desperate attempt to flee the room, only to discover that all the exits were being monitored by security cameras, broadcasting her panicked flight on a split screen next to her incriminating messages. "For 3 months, James continued, his voice relentless, I have systematically documented how this family, my family, uses charity as a front to perpetuate the very injustices it claims to fight. While Isabella practices piano at an underfunded school with broken instruments, the $8 million they embezzled financed dinners like this one, cars, jewelry, and a lifestyle of obscene luxury." The final image on the screens was a devastating side-by-side comparison. On one side, a photo of Roosevelt Elementary School, with its overcrowded classrooms, peeling paint, and broken equipment. On the other, a collection of receipts for the Whitmore family's extravagant spending, all paid for with funds from the Foundation's accounts. "As we speak," James announced, his voice ringing with finality, "the FBI is executing search and seizure warrants at the Whitmore family's homes and offices. All of the Foundation's assets, and their personal assets, have been frozen by the federal court." That was when Margaret finally lost control. "You traitor," she shrieked, her voice raw with hate, trying to rush the stage. "We gave you everything. Your company, your education, your name, everything. And I used all of it," James replied, his voice a quiet, devastating counterpoint to her hysteria, "to expose exactly who you really are. The company you mention, 70% of its current investors are ethical funds that withdrew their resources from the Whitmore family 6 months ago, when they were made aware of this investigation. The final crushing blow came when David Chen walked onto the stage, took the microphone from James, and introduced himself as the legal representative of 500 families who had been systematically harmed by the Foundation's criminal schemes. Class action lawsuits, David announced, his voice resonating with the authority of absolute victory, have already been filed. The estimated damages exceed $50 million. Victoria Whitmore, the woman who had spent her entire life building a reputation as a respected philanthropist, a pillar of society, collapsed into a nearby chair, a broken woman, as she watched decades of lies and hypocrisy being systematically dismantled, live in front of 300 of the most influential people in the city and thousands of viewers. Online. Senator Richard Whitmore, realizing that his political career was not just over, but had been spectacularly incinerated, tried one last, desperate gambit. "This is a smear campaign," he bellowed, his voice hoarse, orchestrated by a resentful, unstable son. "None of this proves anything." "Father," James interrupted, his voice now laden with a final, weary authority. "Your own words, recorded in your own home, during your own family dinners, say everything that needs to be said." As the revelations piled up, one on top of the other, and the masks of civility and tradition were ripped away to reveal the ugly, festering corruption beneath, a new reality began to take shape in the center of that grand ballroom. It was a reality where justice, for once, was not for sale, a reality where the quiet, unassuming courage of a teacher, the transcendent talent of a blind little girl, and the cold, calculated resolve of a man who had finally found his conscience, had toppled an empire. The symphony of the wit, a dissonant cacophony of prejudice and privilege, had finally ended, and in its place, a new, more harmonious melody was beginning to play, a melody that proved that true excellence, true grace, and true greatness know no color, no social class, and no limitations imposed by those who are terrified of the light. 6 months after the gala that became known as the Whitmore Reckoning, James stood at the window of his new office, a sleek, light-filled space overlooking Central Park. He was no longer just the CEO of a successful company. He was the leader of the largest and most effective digital inclusion network in the country. His new company, built on the ashes of the old, had a new name and a new purpose. Rachel entered the office, not with the harried, exhausted air of a teacher overwhelmed by multiple jobs, but with the confident stride of a director. As the head of educational programs, she was now shaping the curriculum for thousands of children. Isabella followed her, her old, clunky sunglasses replaced by a new, state-of-the-art pair of technological glasses that used sonic waves and AI to help her navigate her world with even greater independence. 500 schools have implemented the new system, Rachel said, her voice bright with pride, handing him a report. Reading and math proficiency rates are up an average of 37% in just 5 months. Across town, in a small, cramped apartment she now shared with a bitter and resentful Margaret, Victoria Whitmore stared out of a grimy window at a brick wall. The penthouse, the cars, the jewelry, the entire fortune built on a foundation of corruption had been confiscated. At 63, she was working as a receptionist at a dental clinic, a cruel irony for a woman who had spent her life despising people who worked for a living. Senator Richard Whitmore had lost his seat, his reputation, and his freedom. He was facing a battery of federal criminal charges, with a conviction all but certain. Margaret, abandoned by her high society friends, had discovered the brutal truth that her arrogance and cruelty had been tolerated only as long as she had the status and wealth to sustain the collective hypocrisy. The most painful punishment, however, was not the material loss, but the complete and utter social annihilation. No club would accept them, no event would invite them. They had become pariahs, ghosts haunting the city they once ruled. In James's office, Isabella finished playing a complex piece by Chopin on the small piano he had installed in the corner. She turned, her face alight with a brilliant smile. "When I grow up," she announced, "I want to have a company like yours, to help other children." James knelt beside her, his heart swelling with an emotion he now recognized as pure, uncomplicated love. "You already have something more powerful than any company, Isabella," he said softly. "You have the ability to see people for who they really are." Rachel watched them, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. 6 months ago she was a single mother, locked in a desperate struggle to give her daughter a life of dignity. Now, she had found stability, professional fulfillment, and a deep, abiding love with a man who saw her not as a charity case, but as an equal partner. The Roosevelt School, where Isabella still studied, was transformed. It had modern computer labs, a fully funded music program that attracted the best volunteer teachers in the city, and a library filled with new books. The other 499 schools that had benefited from the repurposed Whitmore funds were undergoing similar miraculous transformations. James realized, in that moment, that he had discovered something that no family fortune, no trust fund, could ever buy. He had found a true purpose. His revenge had not been driven by hatred, but by a deep, unyielding need to stop the injustices that had been perpetuated for generations. The best revenge, he murmured, looking out at the sprawling, vibrant city, is not to destroy your enemies. It is to build something so meaningful, so powerful, that it renders them completely and utterly irrelevant. Isabella ran up to him, holding a new relief drawing. It showed 3 figures, their hands intertwined, standing under a large, leafy tree. "This is us," she said, her small fingers tracing the outlines. A family that chose to find each other. A year ago, James Whitmore had been a lonely, disillusioned CEO, sitting on a cold park bench on Christmas Eve, trapped in a life that was not his own. Today, he understood that family is not defined by bloodlines, but by the conscious, daily choice to love, to support, and to lift each other up. The family that had tried to control him through blackmail and prejudice had lost everything: their wealth, their status, and, most tragically, the opportunity to witness the profound, beautiful transformation that happens when privilege is finally and irrevocably replaced by purpose.